Welcome, everybody. Texans Radio, Mark Vandermeer and John Harris with you, joined by Nick Caserio, Texans General Manager. How's it going, Nick?
Fellas, good to be here.
Great to have you with us. Now, we're going to do a mock draft here. John's going to go first. I'll go second. You go third. That'll be the order.
We did this during the season once. That was the only mock draft we can do.
That was fun, and you actually got some huge thumbs up on that, by the way.
Wow, I did. That's surprising.
Keep in mind, obviously, the Texans were gone for a few years, so there were a lot of Cowboys fans in this area and have been here for a long time. So your pick of Roger Staubach, you played to a different crowd than you thought you were. They loved that Roger Staubach pick. Loved it.
Went old school with it. It was good. It was good. Nick, you mentioned during your press conference about 80 to 100 players, whatever the number is, that are draftable for the Houston Texans. I mean, that would mean there are a lot of guys you can't draft. And what happens with that information? You must track those players, and would they have worked out? Would they not have worked out? They might be available as free agents in the future at some point.
No, that's a big part of it. I think really what you try to do, it's really about positioning more than anything else. And then when you take the total profile of the player, you're saying you're either comfortable with where we've graded him at that level, or in the end, you know what, there's just too much. We think we're going to have better alternatives. So let's focus our time and resources on that group of players. So I'd say right, wrong, or indifferent, we're not, and we're maybe more inclined to eliminate players as opposed to let's put a bunch of players up there and you're trying to sort it out. Then you have more conviction on those players, and you hope, you want to make sure that you're as right as possible. So it doesn't mean you don't like the player. It just means once you've gone through from the beginning till the end, in the end, this is our feeling of the player. Okay, you know what? We're going to move on from him. But to your point, Mark, I would say knowing the player and having done that work is certainly beneficial, so that if he does come up at some point, whether he's on the waiver wire, he's released, he's a free agent, it's all relevant information. And maybe there's things that have changed from now to 2 years later, 3 years later, 4 years later. So you might be eliminating him for now, but that same player, for whatever reason, might show up. I'll give you an example. So going back to Lawrence Guy is a really good example. So Lawrence Guy came out from Arizona State, underclassman, wasn't drafted. And, at the time, I'd say didn't have a draftable grade on him either. I think we liked him as a free agent. So he kind of had some stops and starts at different points. He started his career at some different points, kind of bounced around a little bit. San Diego had a little bit of success, went to Baltimore, became, I'd say, one of their better players. And then we signed him in free agency, whatever year that was. And from the time that he came out to that period of time that we signed him, you're talking about a totally different player. He had matured. He, was kind of a different person, a different player, and ended up being one of I would say, our most consistent, most dependable players. So if you just wrote the player off because of what you thought coming out, then we wouldn't have pursued him in free agency. So I think that's a credit to the player and his growth and development, his maturation. And part of our responsibility is to still do our homework on a player when he is in other buildings. Let's make sure, the picture that maybe was painted initially, is that different now? Okay, you know what? In the end, he might be a fit for what we're trying to do. So that's just one illustration. But going back to your point, it's really maybe for now, but at some point that player could come back into play.
2020, combine, no pro days. 2021, no combine, but pro days. This year, you sort of get back to I'll call it the information gathering process as normal. How did you find that? Was it a little bit more refreshing, the fact that you had the combine, you had pro days, you had 30 visits, you had those opportunities kind of like you used to have? How did that make information gathering for you, Nick, in this process?
Sure, there's just more opportunities to sort of get real live information as opposed to doing it kind of externally. Like, we all figured out a way to do it. We all figured out a way to gather information. But this gives you more an opportunity for pro day, as an example, to see different groups of players, or to see a player maybe do something, maybe it's a little bit better than I thought it was on tape. Maybe there was something different. Maybe his training helped him from January till March, and maybe it's something he did at the training facility. So he improved his lower body strength, he improved his speed, he improved his explosiveness, and then some of the drill work, when he had the opportunity to work with a particular position coach, it was a little bit better than maybe he thought it was. So then you just go back and say, all right, you know what, let's go back and take another look. So that's probably the biggest difference, John. The other thing I think that you started to see a little bit is some players opted to not work out at their pro day. Yeah. So they work out at the combine. If they feel like they made a good showing for themselves, then the pro day was just kind of, it wasn't as important for them. And they decide, you know what, I'm not going to work out at the pro day. And quite frankly, I don't think it's that big of a deal. So if the player chooses not to work out, maybe there's a reason for that. So you don't want to penalize for them or get disgruntled. Oh, he wouldn't work out at his pro day. With individual choice, he made a choice that he felt was best for him. No problem with that. So I think it just gave you more opportunities and more checkpoints and more touch points to maybe get at a player.
How about speed, Nick? Clock speed versus the speed you're seeing on tape. Knowing the level of competition, guys playing in the SEC might be different than FCS, whatever. But how do you go about evaluating that part of it? Because maybe your eyes deceived you, maybe not. How do you evaluate that?
Great question. There's some players that time fast and play fast. They play to that speed that you think you see or that they ran. Other players maybe time slow. Does that mean they're slow? Well, I would say one of the benefits of some of the tracking devices that are available because college is using them is you can see maybe some of their high-speed running. So how much high-speed running they do, their miles per hour. So let's say you have a player, maybe he ran slowly at the combine, but when you see some of the tracking information, he's fast. So, okay, he didn't run a good time or something may have, maybe it's a technique issue with his running, or maybe it's his start, or it could be a myriad of different things. So that's where you just want to go back and maybe have some checks and balances in place and maybe go back and look at some previous players and maybe in a similar situation or studies. So if a player's fast, he's fast. If a player maybe ran slow, he may be faster than you think, but you wouldn't call him slow. So it's a great point, Mark. You just have to kind of weigh out, all right, what are we really getting? But is he fast? Is he fast? Is he 4.28? Do you see that on tape? And there's been plenty of examples. It runs 4.28. John, I'm sure you've seen this. He runs 4.28. You're like, wait a minute, I never saw that on film. So, okay, what does that mean? So you just have to weigh that and just try to make a good decision and make an accurate decision.
You've been in the league for a little over 20 years. Have you ever been in a situation where you've drafted 3 or higher? Is this the highest you've ever drafted? And I'm not sure. I'm sure it didn't change your process, but the fact that you're drafting within the first 45 minutes is a little different than what you're probably used to.
Yeah, I think it just you have to evaluate essentially everybody. It's just a different pool of players that you have to evaluate. I think in 2001, I think it was 2001. I think Bill, drafted Seymour. I forget where he went. He was the highest pick, and then whatever year Mayo came out, I think we were 7th or 8th, and then we traded back to 10.
Yeah,
and then picked Mayo there. So what it does is just you have to know essentially everybody. You have to know top to bottom. Whereas last year, there's 55, 60 players that we eliminated. This year, it's a little bit different. Really got to go 1 through 150, 200, however many it is.
Yeah, because I've seen. I can't remember who it was. Maybe Belichick. I remember walking up to maybe Bradley Chubb, and he's like, "You're a heck of a player. We have no chance of drafting you."
And I think Bradley went 4th overall.
Yeah, he went 4th overall, and I think you guys were down in the 20s or something at that point. Do you do that? Do you look at it? And obviously, it's different this year. But you go, we have no chance for these guys. Do you do your homework? Because you told us you study everybody, you look at everybody. But do you put that much time because you know they're not getting to you?
No, it's a good point, John. So the Chubb example is a good example because I think that year it was B.J. Hill. It was Bradley, and I want to say Kentavious Street might have been a part of that group. Yep. So I'd say the benefit of that workout is, okay, you get to see all those players work out live, and then let's take Chubb. Chubb is a really good player. He is a good player. Yep. So, okay, you're not going to draft that player, but all right, Chubb, his workout live, maybe relative to another player at the same position who maybe you have an opportunity to draft later. Mm-hmm. What's the difference?
Sure.
Is there as big of a gap? Does Chubb do something better than that other player? So really what you're trying to do is just get a barometer, an overall understanding of the position, the player. So that was the benefit, I would say, of something like that. So even though you're not going to draft that player more than likely, but you can compare him to maybe another player at that position to see, what are some of the physical attributes and qualities that player possesses.
Johnny and I always talk about this, Nick. Everybody's got to get better, right? You draft a guy, he's got to get better. No matter who it is, the top prospect in the draft still has to improve.
Yes.
How difficult is it to judge, to determine who is more likely to put in the time or do whatever it takes to improve? Because they all have to get better.
Sure. And then it goes back to the player. So take the physical skill out of it. So does he have the work ethic? Does he have the mindset? Is he intrinsically motivated to improve? Can he improve from year 1 to year 2? Can he take a specific skill and actually make it better through study, through time with his coach, through film evaluation? Those are things, this is where the good players, they become great. They have to take ownership. So it's going to be about their commitment to football, their commitment to becoming a better player, It's not going to be by osmosis. So everybody runs fast, everybody's athletic, everybody has a certain level of skill in the NFL, which is the reason you're in the NFL, which the percentages tell you from high school all the way to the NFL. What's 1% of that player, maybe less than 1%, are actually going to make in the NFL? And so it's really about their level of commitment to becoming a better player and trying to figure out, okay, what do I need to do better? How do I need to do it? And am I committed and focused, and am I intrinsically motivated enough to do it on a consistent basis year after year, week after week, year after year? And if I have a bad year, all right, do I have I would say, the ability to bounce back from facing some adversity? I have the mindset to actually improve and realize, you know what? Okay, I need to be better. And even if you have a good year, all right, there's always things that you can do to improve and get better as a player. So how committed are you to that? You're trying to measure that as much as anything, especially at the players at the top. Like the players at the top that go, they're going because, they're some of the better players in the draft. But it doesn't mean they're a finished product. They got plenty of things that they can work on.
You mentioned earlier about comparisons, and you've been around this for a long time, so you've seen guys back a ways. When you're watching prospects, does it help you in any way, shape, or form to look at a player and go, man, he reminds me of, like you said, Lawrence Guy. He reminds me of Lawrence Guy, and I remember what Lawrence Guy and his career arc. Does that kind of come into play? Player comps from years prior, guys that you studied. Maybe you didn't even draft them, but you just saw how the career went for that player. Does that come into play as you watch these current guys?
Yeah, I think I've been very fortunate and blessed to be able to build up a library of players over time. You have to be careful when making comparison to this player is just like this player.
Right.
This player may have similar attributes to this player. Okay, what is it that makes them similar? And then you maybe look at the arc of their development, or maybe something that triggered, maybe something that caused them to become a better player. Right. So I would say that's the benefit, but you don't necessarily say, okay, this player is just like this player, so we should draft them here.
Right.
I would say you have to be careful about staying away from that. But fortunately, you have a library of players, and you kind of have a reference point. Right. So whether it's a certain position, whether it's where he maybe have been drafted, maybe the arc of his career, his level of improvement, or maybe there's certain attributes that player possessed physically, or it could be as simple as we look at their measurables. So take a position. Okay, this player's measurables are identical to so-and-so. Okay, coincidence? Or maybe then they go back and say maybe there's some things in his playing style. So I'd say those are some of the things, John, that are somewhat relevant, but you don't want to get too caught up and say, this player's like this player, so that means he's going to be this. That's where you start to run into problems.
All right, one more for you. And I don't even know how to ask this, but how many prospective deals, because you have conversations with other GMs about possibilities or whatever, but there must be a lot of conversations about things that never happen, right? So how does that all go down? I mean, do you have like a list of possibilities or just keep things in mind? Because there have to be multiple options at every pick.
Yeah, there's a handful of scenarios that potentially could pop up, but you don't want to kind of inundate yourself with too much information and cause yourself. I mean, I think one of the things that we've done, that I've done here, over the last few days and the next week, is kind of get an idea of just talk to certain teams. Okay, what's your philosophy? Hey, look, are you willing to go to this spot, or are you more inclined to maybe move back? Do you want to have more flexibility throughout the draft? Or you're looking to do anything late? I would say like the New Orleans-Philadelphia trade was an example of teams. They executed the trade. I think a lot of it was just for positioning, and they did it before the draft to say, or at least we kind of know where we're picking, where we're slotted. So I'd say we certainly would be inclined to consider that if it made sense. If not, a lot of this happens in real time. You just have to be able to adjust and react, and you just have to be realistic. You're really looking maybe at, call it 6 to 8 teams around you. Either way, you don't want to get too inundated and kind of look at every scenario. So you have to be smart about how you evaluate that information.
I know things are flying fast and furious in that 15 or 10 minutes when you're on the phone. Have you ever had a situation where you've talked to a team that you thought it was the Cardinals and it actually was the 49ers as you're making a deal? Like, hey, Jimmy. No, this isn't Jimmy. This is Billy. Have you ever had a situation like that? Does that happen?
Yeah, it can get hectic if you have like 3 trade scenarios that you're looking at, and you're trying to get back to the team, and you think you're calling one team. I mean, I think we've come down to the wire too, even where the clock almost struck 0.
Yeah.
And because the way the trades work, you really don't have a trade until both sides communicate that to the league.
Right.
So, and you have to do it within the time frame to make sure that the trade actually goes through. So, I mean, we've been on the clock with 3 minutes, and you're on the phone with the other team. Okay, we're good. All right, I'm going to call the league. Okay, then it's 2 minutes. All right, the league's saying, hey, we got to wait to hear from the other teams. You're not even on the clock. So I mean, again, that's why you try to have to maintain as much, just take the emotion out of it and just, understand there's, pressure and a timing element. But ultimately, you just get it executed, trying to maintain cooler heads, and then pick the player and then move on.
Coffee? You're going to have coffee that night?
I'll have a little bit of coffee.
Okay, good. I will too. Nick, thanks a lot for joining us.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.